I will get us going. Thank you, Sally. And just an acknowledgement at the beginning, Sally's done the heavy lifting on all these materials and really coordinated these orientations for us. These didn't exist like 4 or 5 years ago. This is a fairly new process, and it's still a work in progress. So as we go through, I think after these 3 sessions, it'd be helpful to know, are there things, and maybe as you go through your terms, what are things that you wish we would have presented to you early on, or what you would have known? I think that this is certainly in flux as we do this. So your views and opinions are going to be helpful. So I am at the University of Iowa, and I am right now the past president of FASEB. So I've been affiliated with FASEB for over 20 years in a variety of different roles. I was at one point vice president for science policy, then on the board, and then you'll see our succession is president-elect, president, past president, and the past president is the chair of the Leadership Development Committee, and the past president is then, I don't know, is co-chair or vice chair, and has the honor of working on the orientation process. So that's what I get to do, which I'm looking forward to. And I'll just call on people as we go. But Marianne, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. We've already met once before. So we met last time I was president. It's a week or 2 later, and now I'm immediate past president. So I chair the Leadership Development Committee. And as with Kevin, I've been involved with FASEB in different positions, different roles for a number of years.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Jennifer Zeitzer, Deputy Executive Director of FASEB, also run the Office of Public Affairs, and also working with our meetings and conferences department right now to assist during our busy summer season.
So you'll hear from Jennifer here soon. Joe?
Hi, everybody. My name is Joe Cheatwood. I am at Southern Illinois University School of Medicine down in Carbondale, Illinois, closer to St. Louis than we are to any other major cities, about 5.5, 6 hours from Chicago. So even though we're in Illinois, everybody thinks we're up north, we're way down south. I have been involved with FASEB since I joined the Science Policy Committee about 3 years ago as a representative for the Histochemical Chemical Society. And which is who I'm representing on the board as well. I have been with the Histochemical Chemical Society for probably about 10 years now, in various committee positions and leadership positions within the Chemical Society. So I'm glad to be taking this next step and helping FASEB to operate at its highest level. So thanks for including me.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I think it's great to be able to transition from the Science Policy Committee and have that exposure into the board. That really, I think, can be really beneficial. So, Amy.
Hi, I'm Amy Ingevik. I'm an assistant professor at the Medical University of South Carolina in Charleston, and I'm new to FASEB, but I've been involved in FASEB societies such as the American Physiological Society and the American Society of Investigative Pathology and the HCS since grad school.
So you are a new board member?
Yes, I'm the early career early career something representative, I guess.
Yeah. And are you which society are you claiming?
The American Society for Investigative Pathology, ASA.
Okay, good. Clint or Clinton?
I typically go by Clint. So
okay.
My name is Clint Allred. I'm a distinguished professor at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. I've known about FASEB really my whole career. I came up and my PhD is in nutrition, and at the time, American Society of Nutrition was a member, and I went to EB for many, many years. Somewhere along the way, I started helping out with the evaluation for the Excellence Awards. And so I've been on that committee for a number of years. I don't know how many years now, a while. And I've become really involved in this part of my career in the Society of Experimental Biology and Medicine. I am a member of other societies associated with FASEB, but I'm representing the Society of Experimental Biology and Medicine. I've done a number of roles for them, and so I'm excited about the opportunity to sort of transition into this and help out where I can.
Great. Well, thanks to all of you for stepping up and at a time, as you'll see, I think over the next 3 sessions, there's a lot going on in this space, biomedical research, especially with societies that support our scientists. FASEB is no different, and FASEB is trying to come up with some solutions and be a leader in that area. So I think you'll have some great opportunities over the next couple of years to have some really impactful contributions to what we're going to do here broadly. So we've got a big slide deck to go through today. I'll go through them quickly. What I'd ask is if you have questions, comments, just raise your hand, and at any point we can stop and discuss. Sally will send these slides out, correct, afterwards with a recording. So if things go a little quick and you miss something, want to glance back, you'll have those resources, and we'll have opportunities maybe even the next couple of sessions if you want to clarify or follow up on anything we talked about today. That'll be certainly fine, and or send an email to me or Mary Ann or Sally. Any of us can help clarify anything for you. So what I want to start with is really laying out what your role is as a new board member, what is FASEB, and how will I get involved in navigating and understanding what my responsibilities as a board member are, the fiduciary responsibilities. And the answer to getting sued, probably no. You're fine there. We got protections built in. Don't worry about that. And we'll go through those topics in the 3 sessions. Today, we're really going to talk about some of the responsibilities broadly, but at a high level, what FASEB is. The responsibilities we'll get into next time with Sally for the most part, I think. So just high level, what are the responsibilities of an individual on in this case, a nonprofit board? And you see those the overall welfare of that organization. In this case, it's FASEB. Understanding the revenue policies, the revenues themselves, how the revenues get used. There's certainly some responsibilities as a board to oversee how funds get used in this kind of a setting. Obviously, the excellence of the organization is what we strive for as a board. There's ethics and organizational policies. We have a very strong policy operation process that we follow at all times, and you'll, I think, get a good flavor for that over the next couple sessions. How we as the board oversee the CEO, and that's Frank Krause, and the evaluation of the CEO on a yearly basis. And so there are responsibilities and evaluations that come with that role that the board owns. And then the legal compliances, as I mentioned, what are your fiduciary responsibilities as a board member? And I think probably, Sally, at one of the later sessions, we will talk about expectations for you as a board member. Not you're wearing a board hat, not a society hat, and that is a challenge to think through. And certainly, it is a challenge at times where we're going to be talking about some aspects of how FASEB progresses going forward versus some of the society. So I think that's going to be an intriguing and interesting question we'll have. So where does that come in? Number 2, maybe, Sally? Session 2?
Yeah, number 2, we'll talk about that. And then, so in number 2, we'll kind of lay out the legal framework that governs those different hats, if you will. And then in part 3, we'll actually talk a little bit more about what it actually looks like in practice.
Good. So more to come on that. So next slide, Sally, please. Okay. So and Mary Ann, please jump in at any point and correct me or add your insights. That would be appreciated. So we'll talk about governance and staffing first out of the gate. Sally, you want to move on to the next slide? So we have 22 member societies, over 110,000 researchers, and it's a broad range of disciplines that spans biological and biomedical sciences, everything, and some of you touch on that, certainly immunology, anatomy, molecular biology, developmental biology, genetics, physiology, pharmacology. So it's a pretty robust span to represent some of the most impactful, prolific, high-profile biomedical societies in the United States, and that's where FASEB really can carry the weight and has some clout and some certainly a lot of relevance in Washington, D.C. with funding agencies and with the federal government, and we'll talk more about that hopefully as we go, and certainly in the public affairs sphere. Jennifer will be able to enunciate some of that for us. There's a range of society sizes in the small hundreds to 10,000, and that's going to be impactful for us as we start thinking about what the future of FASEB is and what the future of some of these societies are. So next slide, Sally. So if you're looking for some summer reading, I don't know that I'd highly recommend. I've got the book here somewhere. I've looked at in the past, but there is a history of FASEB. We're into 112 years now, if I do my math correct. And this was formed in 1912, interestingly, to around three societies: American Physiological Society, the American Society of Biochemical and Molecular Biology, ASBMB, and then the American Society for Pharmacology and Experimental Therapeutic Aspects. So the goal was to help create an environment for an organization of an annual meeting across these three societies, and then build up journals that are published. And all of these have a long history of journal publications. These are some of the top societies and top journals in the country and certainly internationally as well. So then what happened in 1989, there was a shift in FASEB to more of a public affairs focus. And this actually led to a big uptick in the number of societies that joined FASEB. But it did eliminate, most of you are way too young to remember, there was actually before it was experimental biology, which I think, I think it was, Clint, you mentioned experimental biology. Well, even before that, it was the FASEB meeting. So Marianne, you remember that, I'm sure. We would go to the FASEB meeting. So then it changed to EB, experimental biology. To this day, some people still think of it as the FASEB meeting. And why did FASEB eliminate the FASEB meeting or the experimental biology meeting? And that's a long story, but we were only there to help in the carrying out of the meeting. We had nothing to do with the actual meeting structure itself. And so that one's been confusing for people for many, many years. And as you note on the slide, there is an opportunity to purchase if you ever have an interest in the history of FASEB. So next slide. Thank you, Sally. So FASEB is a 501c3 nonprofit corporation. Don't mean to be insulting, but what that means for us is that we are not, we can't make a profit. So any funds we have, we invest, and you'll see where we've been investing some of our funds over the last several years. As board members, you are a steward of the society's or the federation's assets, and those assets include the property, the business, and the employees. And by law, as a 501c3 and as a board member, you're to exercise due diligence and prudence to ensure that the organization is well managed and sound. And so Sally will talk more about either Sally or me. I'm not sure how we'll handle that yet, but we will go through that in session 2 for you. Next slide, Sally. Thanks. So there's different types of membership for the society, and this is a development that's becoming more and more relevant, and I'll explain that. You see the full membership responsibilities and opportunities, and then there's associate membership as well. Some has to do with voting privileges, some has to do with resource access. We're seeing just to be very transparent, we're seeing more societies starting to shift to associate membership over the last couple of years. And that's a telling sign, I think, that we'll talk a little bit more about, because there are some societies that are really getting crunched from a financial point of view. And that's driven by a variety of factors that we can lay out. We've done a couple years ago a scenario planning task force. We held several meetings to determine what's going on in this space, certainly with FASEB and others. And one of the ramifications, I think, is a lot of societies are really struggling with memberships and dues and resources, funding, in terms of meetings not being profitable, being very expensive, things like that. So those are the kinds of things you will, I guarantee you, be wrestling with over the next couple of years as board members, as to how to navigate this space broadly. Next slide, Sally. So the composition of the board you see laid out there, there are voting members. That's the board members. Within that umbrella, there are officers. Those are elected individuals. There are the board of directors themselves, and then we have our early career representatives like Amy. So all of these individuals are voting. Then the non-voting members are the Federation's secretary. That's Frank Krause, who's the CEO. And generally at our board meetings, you'll see other participants. And that's made up of people like Sally and Jennifer, our senior staff, the executive officers from the 22 societies are all invited. One of the disappointments I've always had is the limited participation of these individuals. And to be totally honest, that creates some disconnect in terms of communication and perhaps friction between the board member and their society leadership. So we continue to struggle with that, and hopefully can make some headway in how we navigate those communication lines. Our public affairs staff that Jennifer oversees attends, as well as various committee task force leadership who may not be on the board. For example, Science Policy Committee leadership or someone like that could be involved. Next slide, Sally. So here's the current executive committee. Beth Garvey's our new president as of July 1st, and you see Eric Kelly is the president-elect, and then Mary Ann's past president. You see the makeup of these individuals. We also have, besides the officers, we have 2 board representatives who are elected from the board or who are on the executive committee. And these are, in this case, it's Diane Robbins and Mike Schaller. And then we also have the elects of the DEI and science policy, not just the vice presidents, but their elects as well. And the intent there is to make sure people get onboarded fully up to speed. It's been very successful, I think, to be able to engage this leadership team and get them trained up and ready to jump in some pretty big responsible positions as they navigate and lead their different areas. Next slide, Sally, please.
I'm just going to jump in to just note that the executive committee meets almost weekly.
Right. That's right.
And they make decisions in between the board meetings, but they are limited to making decisions on behalf of the board that are things the board has already made a decision about. So they're in only very, very rare cases will they be making a decision on behalf of the board that the board hasn't already talked about at some point in the past. And when that happens, we get in touch with you right away. Luckily, this has not happened in a while. 2020 was a year where things were happening. We had to cancel our in-person SRCs. We had to do things like that. And so those were things that had to happen before the next board meeting. So the executive committee did it, and we communicated that information to the board right away. We also do, and I will show you at one of our later meetings on the volunteer portal, document all the actions that the executive committee makes so that the board is always informed of what this group is doing. So it's not a secret cabal that is meeting and doing things on behalf of the board without the rest of the board's input.
Good point. Yes, and if you think about it, we have a board meeting once a month. Things do come up potentially. There are a few examples. Jennifer can also mention if there's a sign-on letter, or we need to get something out very timely. It's time sensitive, not controversial, but really important for FASEB to be out there and be engaged. Those are the kinds of things where the executive committee can move forward quickly. So.
Yeah. If you want, Kevin, I can give the most recent example that we just discussed. So there is a bill that will be introduced in Congress momentarily to create a national gun violence research program to be coordinated by OSTP through other agencies, including NIH. FASEB has long supported the use of federal dollars for gun violence research, going back to a decision the board made in 2014. The sponsor of this legislation had asked for a quote from FASEB, basically saying that we support their efforts without flat out endorsing the bill, because that would have to go to the board for full consideration and decision. And the executive committee voted to provide a quote thanking this representative for paying attention to this important issue. The quote basically mirrors our existing position. That was the most recent example, but the congressional office needed this within 2 or 3 days. And so that's why we went to the executive committee.
Yeah, and I'll touch on this a little bit more later in the slide deck, but probably maybe in my mind, one of the most impactful things is that FASEB does is the ability to weigh in and comment, and these agencies want to hear from us. So that's an important piece of it. So in terms of the governance hierarchy that's depicted on this slide, obviously the board of directors is on top, and then the executive committee, which I just talked about, underlies that. And then there's committees and task force. Any board member can propose formation of a new committee, and those are then tied in with objectives of the strategic mission and vision of the Federation. Task forces, we've got one going on right now, at least one going on right now. That's we'll talk about near the end of this presentation. And one of the things I really appreciate about how FASEB is structured is that we do have the flexibility to convene a task force quickly or put together committees based on developments and needs in the community. And I'll have some examples of that going forward. So we can be nimble, which is frankly, if you're at a university, you appreciate that that's not always the case. I think FASEB's a little bit better at moving forward in a timely manner on important issues than universities are. That's just my editorial comment. But, next slide, Sally. So here are some of the active committees. The ones on the left-hand side are defined by bylaws the FASEB has. And as I mentioned at the top, we do really have paid attention to the bylaws and the governance, the policies, as that's our fiduciary responsibilities. Some of the areas not defined by bylaws clearly are listed in the middle. And these are always activities that are ongoing, and different members of the board will be involved in some of these, as well as science policy and staff members. So lots of moving parts to what FASEB does, just depicted here. And right now, the sole task force is the Working Group Integration Task Force. You may have heard of what was the Future Focus Task Force, which sunset on June 30th. And this is the new task force as of July 1st. And you will, over the next several months, be hearing a lot about this. I'll touch base on it here in a few minutes as well. Next. Mary Ann is chairing that task force, so she'll be able to weigh in on that as well.
Yeah, Kevin, can I just weigh in? We also have a generative artificial intelligence task force.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
We do.
Yes.
So, yeah. So there's actually 2 task forces.
Oh, good. Thanks.
And that is also a new one. And it just, I think, speaks to the points that you raised, Kevin, that we were very quickly able to put together a bunch of experts in the field in general areas of generative AI and start dealing with developing a framework for some of the challenges that we and our societies and also universities are facing and grappling with all of the myriad complications of artificial intelligence. So that's in place, and that's going to be reporting to the board as well.
Yeah.
I believe that Robin Lorenz, who I'm replacing, is chairing that.
Yes, she is. Yep.
And Joe Yost, who is our VP-elect for Science Policy, is the vice chair. So I apologize that I left that one off of this slide, and Marianne was the first person to catch it.
I'm awake.
That's on
Well-
me. I should have caught that last night as the staff liaison to that, so my bad.
Well, and Joe, you raised a good point with Robin taking on this responsibility as board members. Once you leave, you're always still on somebody's Rolodex to jump back in. So be prepared for that. There are and it's opportunities. You can, once we have people involved and really develop a strong knowledge base and a passion for supporting what we're doing, I think it's easy to get these people to continue to serve FASEB in various roles. So next slide, Sally. So next we're going to jump into the strategic plan. So next slide. And this is over to you, Jennifer, right?
It is. Okay, so FASEB does have a strategic plan that we have been working to execute on. I can't even remember when we approved this, Sally, so I apologize for that.
I think it was the in-person board meeting before I joined FASEB.
Okay, so it's a little bit dated, but it's still current. One of the things we did when we approved the strategic plan was we did not actually put a time frame on this, knowing that we would have a lot to do. So these are the 5 key planks of what it is that we're trying to do. I will say the strategic plan guides all of the work and the priorities that we focus on. This was developed with lots of input from the board of directors. So when we consider getting involved in the situation or taking on new projects or new tasks, we go back to the strategic plan and say, where does that issue or where does that project fit within these 5 planks of the strategic plan? And then we have goals and objectives underneath that. Next slide, please. One of the things we do every year to manage the workload and to make sure that we have optimal opportunities for our volunteer leadership, including the board, to weigh in, is we put together what's called a board work plan, which is what the board is going to be helping us work on over the course of the year. And when I say year, I'm referring to our governance year, which runs from July 1 to June 30th. So it's not a calendar year, so there's always some overlap. And so one of the latest things that we will be working on throughout the rest of 2024 and into 2025 is we have yet another new task force, the Working Group Integration Task Force. Frank will talk a little bit more about what this group is going to be doing. But every year when we put together the budget and the staff puts together its work plan, we then integrate, well, how are we going to involve the board in the decision making, because it is the board who makes the decision. Staff can provide overall general direction, but what FASEB does and how we approach things is heavily influenced by our board of directors. So one of the things Sally has done as our director of governance is making sure that we have good governance practices. So every time we have a new task force, first of all, we consider whether or not we need a task force or a committee. All task forces have a charge, and we work to develop that charge with the volunteer leadership with the board. So at our last board meeting in June, one of the things we did was get input from the board about the charge for this working group integration task force. Next slide. All right, so how does FASEB advance science and what is the work that we do around here? I would say a core of what we do is our public affairs and science policy work. This is where we try and use all the voices of FASEB to influence what the federal agencies are doing with regard to advancing science and promoting the biomedical research workforce. We do primarily work with 5 agencies. We do not have connections to all of them. They are National Institutes of Health, National Science Foundation, Department of Energy Office of Science, the USDA or Department of Agriculture Competitive Research Program, and then there is a small biomedical research program at the VA, Veterans Administration, that we support as well too. This is a long-standing list of priorities and agencies that FASEB has been involved with for a number of years now. So we do not do a lot of work with the EPA or the CDC. We're working more with the basic science agencies. A lot of the work that we do in trying to influence policy is making sure that the federal agencies are hearing from us. So when they issue RFIs or requests for information, we are responding to a number of those. I think we did 23 or 24 last year, even more the year before. The decision about which RFIs to respond to is heavily influenced by the Science Policy Committee. Every position that FASEB takes on a science policy issue pretty much goes to the Science Policy Committee and then to the board for final ratification. It would be extremely rare for us to go straight to the board without talking to the Science Policy Committee first. That being said, there are a few exceptions. With the expansion of our DEAI, Diversity, Equity, Accessibility and Inclusion Committee, and our new Data Management Advisory Committee, we are now involving those committees in the formulation of our policy statements as well too. We do that because those are the committees with the SMEs or subject matter experts. So we recently responded to an RFI seeking input on the collection of biographical and demographic data. And we ran that through the DEAI committee and brought that to the board because the experts are on that committee. On the advocacy side, we do our priority, right? Our number one priority is advocating for increased funding for biomedical research across those 5 agencies that I mentioned. We are also working very closely with Congress on non-funding legislation. So if you're familiar with authorizing legislation or legislation that creates new programs at agencies, I think the CHIPS and Science Act that was passed by Congress in 2022 is a great example. That legislation put forward a path and a vision for a great expansion of funding for NSF. Unfortunately, that has not yet materialized, but we are still working to make that happen. Right now, we are very engaged in, there's a lot of efforts going on Capitol Hill around the idea of reforming and reorganizing NIH. Those efforts are just getting underway, but in August, we will be submitting a response to 2 RFIs issued by Congress asking for FASEB's viewpoints on how NIH might be streamlined and reorganized to be a bit more efficient. So those are the 2 big things there. We also work very closely with our Society Public Affairs staff to keep them abreast of information, what's happening on Capitol Hill. We meet with them once a week. We do have an in-house lobbyist, and we also have Federal Science Partners. It is a contract lobbying firm made up of former staff from the House and Senate Appropriations Committees who have insider access that we do not. And they use that on our behalf to get us information, to get us meetings with key people on Capitol Hill. And they work with us as well too. Federal Science Partners is also very valuable in helping us devise and develop strategy because they know the insides of how Congress works. And they have collectively, I think, about 40 years of experience across their partners in the appropriations process. So they have been instrumental in the last couple of weeks in helping us think about this approach to NIH reform and how we might best get the FASEB influence out there and to respond. Next slide. So this is just quickly our Legislative Affairs program hews very closely to the annual federal budget timeline so that we can make sure we have the most influence. So we often meet with the Office of Management and Budget. That is the White House budget office that has a huge influence over what the federal science agencies are able to do once they get their money from Congress. We also, before the president's budget usually is released, because it's always late, FASEB every year puts together our annual federal funding recommendations that we send to Congress, which is basically what we tell Congress what we think those 5 agencies need. The development of that document will start in December, where we get input from the board and then gets ratified by the board, usually in February, so that we have it ready to go and can deploy it for our annual Capitol Hill Day in March. And the reason we hold Capitol Hill Day in March is not because the weather's great, but it's because that is when the congressional appropriations process gets underway. And the one thing we've learned is that the earlier you get to Capitol Hill to make your requests known about funding for agencies, the better it is. So we are usually up on Capitol Hill about the same time that the Appropriations Committee is receiving the president's budget and starting to make some decisions. The other reason we do that too is so that we can bring the voices of scientists to Capitol Hill to plead and beg for funding from the people who know best what it can be used for and why more funding is necessary, so that you will have the influence before the Appropriations Committees finalize the budget, which is usually at this point late fall. But throughout the spring, to reinforce the work that is done during Capitol Hill Day by the actual working scientists, FASEB will submit testimony to the congressional committees that provide funding for those agencies. This testimony basically repeats our federal funding recommendations, and it's posted on our website. We also post it on social media and share it with every congressional office. And then we monitor all of the Appropriations Committee hearings and markups that take place on the funding bills and report out on those to the society staff every week. We have a bi-weekly newsletter, the Washington Update, and there is always a legislative update every issue of the Washington Update. And it now comes out on the second and fourth Thursday of the month. And later on, I can drop a link in the chat if you'd like to sign up for that. Due to GDPR rules, I actually cannot sign you up for that. It is an opt-in process. But we do encourage you not only to read that, but to share that with anybody in your society that you think would like to see it. Same deal, if there are members of your society who wish to be added to the subscription list, you can share the link with them and they can go ahead and do that. But we unfortunately cannot sign them up ourselves. So our busiest time for advocacy is always in that February to sort of end of summer period. And where we are right now, the House of Representatives and the Senate are starting to work on the fiscal year 2025 funding bills. This is for the federal fiscal year that will begin on October 1, 2024. So we've been actively monitoring those and connecting with the staff and pleading for more funds and reporting out on that. Because of the election, that process will not be wrapped up before November. So we are keeping our fingers crossed that for a little Christmas present from Congress in the form of increased funding for NIH. But that is not something that we'll get, that we won't even have a good sense of where that's going until after Election Day, unfortunately. Next slide. So as I noted earlier, our Science Policy Committee, we like to lovingly refer to it as the think tank of FASEB. So this is where all the good ideas come from. The Science Policy Committee, as I noted, approves any policy statement that we issue, if it's in response to a federal agency, if it is in response to an inquiry we might get from another source. The board also, I forgot to mention, whenever FASEB endorses federal legislation, that decision is made by the board of directors. Staff will make a recommendation as to whether or not we think it's a relevant piece of legislation that would achieve good things, but the board makes that. But the Science Policy Committee approves all of the science policy statements. So you'll see your leadership here. We've got our Vice President for Science Policy, the Vice President-elect, and the staff liaison to this is Naomi Harlan-Bacchus, who's been at FASEB for almost 6 years. She is a PhD out of the University of Louisville, specialty in neuroscience. And she's terrific and works very closely with the committee leadership to put together the agenda for the monthly calls, to also make sure that all documents, so drafts of things are sent out in a timely manner. Today is actually a great day. We have our Science Policy Committee meeting for the month of July next Tuesday afternoon on Zoom. The agenda will go out today. So Naomi has been working with Mike to get that in tip-top shape. And we strive to get those agendas out on the Thursday before the Tuesday meeting. This chart just talks about the development of our policy statements, and we actually follow all of these steps from the blue to the red. So it often starts with someone says, FASEB needs to do something. FASEB should take a stand. I will say that the way that the proper way for this to come up is for a board member or a member of the Science Policy Committee to reach out and say, we would like FASEB to consider taking a stand on issue X. or has FASEB taken a stand on issue X? We often get requests from the Society Public Affairs staff as well, but the official process is it should come through the board or science policy. Once we decide that we do need to take action or consider something, the staff will put together an action plan and then run it by the relevant committee, in this case, usually the Science Policy Committee, to say, here's our suggested action plan. We get input from the Science Policy Committee leadership as to whether or not that plan makes sense, and then we start the execution process. Because the Science Policy Committee meets every month, we do have an opportunity to do this on a fairly quick basis, considering that we're a federated model of 22 different societies. Once that deliberation and development is put together, then it goes to the Science Policy Committee during its monthly meeting for review, then to the board, and then dissemination upon approval of the board. We do have several subcommittees underneath the Science Policy Committee. Our biggest ones are animals and research and education, and we also have one on biomedical research, workforce, and training. So many of these, if it's an animal related issue, then that will go first to the animal subcommittee and then up to the full SPC, if at all possible. I will note that where we are challenged is when the federal agencies only give us 30 days to respond to an RFI. We have been making progress. NIH now is trying to do minimum 60-day RFIs because FASEB has been screaming at them for 5 years about that. So we're finally making some progress. Anyway, so sometimes we do have to bypass a formal review by a subcommittee. If that is necessary to respond by a deadline, then we will connect with the leadership of, let's say, the animal subcommittee and get their input before it goes to the SPC. So we do very strictly adhere to process so that we can manage things. And we will also request extensions from agencies when we can. And most of the time, we have a mixed track record of getting a yes. I will say that we are personally extremely frustrated with the White House Office of Science and Technology policy right now, because they keep issuing these 20, 30-day RFIs and then refusing to give us extensions. Anyway, and you can see the primary roles about who drives these decisions by the color code. So there's a role for staff, and there's a role for staffs and volunteers, and then the committees. Next. So these are just a couple of our advocacy examples in 2024 and 2025. I will also note that whenever we put together new resources, we're big fans of fact sheets and infographics. All of those pretty much come from ideas generated by the board and Science Policy Committee. So sometimes it's we should issue a statement, and other times it's we should do a fact sheet. So we love those ideas and suggestions. I will say that all of our science policy fact sheets do go through the Science Policy Committee for review and approval, and that is to make sure that the information being communicated is scientifically sound and evidence-based, and that also what we're trying to communicate is clear to a non-scientific audience. The majority of our fact sheets are designed for members of Congress, other scientists, and agency folks. And so we do try to make them as clear and crisp as possible. And then in addition to the fact sheets, we are back in the webinar business. We were doing a lot of webinars pre-COVID, and then during COVID, the webinar space just got so saturated, and we were seeing just terribly low participation in our webinars because there was too much competition. So we're now back in business, and the latest webinar series that started at the end of last month is an offshoot from our Science Policy Symposium last fall that explored what we can do to be more supportive of IDEA and EPSCoR states and how to get more funding to lower resourced states. And so we have a 3-part webinar series, and we'll be highlighting the impact of these funding mechanisms in different states, starting with Mississippi. We also have a new series of fact sheets that will be issuing basically in conjunction with those webinars. And I will say also, a lot of our advocacy fact sheets come from the input of our members who participate in Capitol Hill Day, when they get asked questions and say, I was in Senator Ted Cruz's office and was asked about why we still do research with invertebrates. Why is that important? And so that's actually where this research with invertebrates fact sheet came from, with comments and questions we had heard during Capitol Hill Day one year. Next slide. So we're back to the strategic plan, Sally. Okay. Oh, you're on mute.
Yes, we're back to Kevin.
Okay, great. If there are questions, I can also answer those too.
Yes,
I would-
and thanks, Jennifer. One thing she kind of alluded to on the science policy aspects, she's highlighted, and the thing, probably maybe the most impactful thing for me with FASEB has over my long career in various committees is to see language generated by the Science Policy Committee that ends up being verbatim in an RFI within NIH circles or something at congressional level, things like that. So just driving home the point that FASEB is very impactful at the federal level, NIH and with federal agencies. So don't diminish the fact that this is really important, and FASEB has a lot of clout in these circles, and we take it very seriously. So
Yeah.
very positive.
Yeah, we'll brag a little bit. We had a meeting in December, and John Lorsch, the director of the National Institute of General Medical Sciences, came to talk to us about, their future vision for the training of the biomedical research workforce. And he said, at NIH, there are 3 questions that are asked. Basically, two questions, sorry. What does AAMC think, and what does FASEB think? That was great for us to hear, that we're in that vaunted space, but it's because we represent such a depth and breadth of the biological space, and everybody at NIH knows that when they receive our comments in response to an RFI or something, they're being sent on behalf of 22 societies, and that we are speaking with a united voice, and they recognize and appreciate that.
And I would also add that the other aspect why there's credibility in cloud is because of our tremendous professional staff, like Jennifer, like Sally, like Naomi, and they are very well respected. People know them by their first names in these agencies. So they're actually the front facing piece of FASEB on a lot of these things in DC. So lots of kudos for them. So moving on, we'll pick up pace here a little bit. You see the DEAI leadership outlined there. The 2 individuals on the left of the screen are our volunteers, Lauren and Rachel. And so this is a fairly new position. The vice president for DEAI, I think it's maybe now 2 or 3 years, Sally, 2. And so then Yvette Seeger is the director of strategic scientific initiatives, one of our key staff members, and LV and Maribeth are also supportive there. So next slide, Sally, please. So you see 3 programs really highlighted there. We have invested as a board $1.5 million in the DEAI efforts to support 2 programs, the CARES program and the LEAD program. CARES is to provide financial support aimed at alleviating financial burdens associated with caregiving, and it enables our FASEB Society members to continue things like their scientific training, professional development, career progression. It's been hugely successful for us. And then the LEAD is the leadership engagement and appreciation of differences. And that's a reverse mentoring program that we started. I think a lot of that came from early career members that suggested this is a really good program to implement, and we've done that. It's junior level mentors providing perspective in the workplace, cultural, individual, group views, and for research committees for senior people. So we're reversing the perspective and the mentoring approach. Also, we at FASEB received a $500K award from FASEB to pilot a Fellows for the Future, and that's a cohort-based program of early career researchers in historically excluded groups. So these are 3 active efforts, investments from NSF, big investments from FASEB to move this forward. So you'll hear more about that as we go forward. So next slide, Sally. Talk a little bit about research and education and the strategic goals there. These are, the first one is DataWorks. And DataWorks is a effort to bring biological biomedical research communities together and advance human health through data sharing and reuse. We realized 3 or 4 years ago how much data are out there and available. The ability to maximize and utilize and leverage that. FASEB has teamed up somewhat with NIH. NIH is very interested in this. We were anticipating that there was going to be more true emphasis by FASEB in terms of how grants were going to be shaped out in terms of having these data management plans. It's really not shaken out that they've had a lot of teeth in what was expected in these programs, but we've carried on with DataWorks. You see some of the activities. There's a data salon, there's a help desk, there's a prize that's funded by the NIH for individuals or teams in terms of effective use of data. The program has been a little slow out of the gates. I'd say a lot of that was because, as I mentioned, the NIH, we were anticipating would really expect all investigators to have a much more robust vested need to have data management plans and utilize those. It's really, to this point, not manifested itself, I think, to the degree we anticipated. So you can get on, there's a website within FASEB. I think you can get more details as you're interested in that, and you'll hear more about that because it is one of these programs we're funding at the board level that we're evaluating in terms of the investment and the return on investment. Next slide, Sally, please. In terms of the research side of things, we have for many, many years supported scientific meetings and conferences, the scientific research conferences. Some of you may have attended one of these at some point. These are 4 to 5 day conferences in person. These are organized by researchers in the life sciences and then FASEB supports them. The second is a Catalyst conference, and that is a half-day virtual conference. It's fairly new for us. That takes place allowing individuals to explore new topics. It provides researchers at any level to start developing an organization, really get some experience in that. And the idea is get those started and maybe then transition to these scientific research conferences. And then most recent venture we've had is the conferences on demand. These are online access to videos that are actually being made from keynote, invited, and oral presentations at some of our scientific research conferences. So continuing to try to get and disseminate content out from what we are producing. Publications is hugely important to FASEB, both from a reputational and dissemination of information point of view, and also revenue generation for the site. It's very important for us. The challenge, you probably are aware, some of you at least to some extent, is how societies are navigating open access. And I guarantee you over the next year, you're going to hear a lot about that and how we, as we go forward, are going to integrate open access with the FASEB journals. One of them already is, that's the Bioadvances. FASEB journal is one of the preeminent journals internationally, not just in the US, in the biological journal realm. We are going to be working, societies are really starting to realize the importance of open access, the impact of open access on their revenue generating processes. We feel at FASEB we're ahead of the curve. We've got one of the experts in the country, Darla Henderson, who oversees publications programs for FASEB. And so that's a real point of focus for us going forward at FASEB. Next slide, Sally, please. So finally, operations and financials, and I'm going to turn that over to Jennifer because she knows all things about money and budgets and finance, right?
Yikes. No, that's not true. The good news is FASEB does have our world headquarters. It is in Rockville, Maryland, just up the street from NIH, which is super convenient. Also not too far from NSF. So we are still in, or we are employing a remote first work environment, which basically means we come in for meetings as necessary, especially where we want to collaborate with our colleagues. And we have a great office space to be able to do that. And former board members can tell you that we have now dual purposed that office as a place for the board to gather and have dinner and fellowship during our board meetings because it's very flexible space. We also are online with each other all the time. So even when we're not in the office, we are connected because our CEO loves technology. And so we have lots of tools at our disposal. In terms of our organizational chart, so as you can see here, this is the quick org chart. At the top are you guys at the board, and Frank reports to the board. I report to Frank. Then in terms of the rest of the remaining organization, you'll see that the directors of each of our major departments also report directly up to Frank. So Sybil Barnes in our communications and marketing group. Our financial services is outsourced to a fantastic firm called Markham. You may be aware of them. They do a lot of really great work with nonprofits. And Julie Jones is our contract CFO, and she is brilliant. Sally, of course, handles our governance. Sue Schiaffino is our human resources officer. We also do outsource our information technology to an organization called Virtual Logic Group, and they have been keeping us up and running and functional for several years now, including throughout the pandemic. FASEB was able to overnight seamlessly convert from in-person work to virtual work back in 2020, and that has continued to this day because of our assets and resources from Virtual Logic Group. I'm in charge of public affairs. Darla Henderson is our director of publications. She's a PhD with a 20+ year history in scientific journal publishing, including previously working for the American Chemical Society. And then right now we do have a vacancy in our scientific meetings and conferences department that used to be led by Andrea Bauerfeind. If you ever worked with her, she just recently left FASEB, and we are working to bring in her replacement as quickly as we can, and I've stepped in to help out with that until a replacement is hired. Then you can kind of see where legislative and scientific, legislative affairs and science policy falls with in there, and that is basically the core FASEB staff in a nutshell. I will note that we have multiple staff in our scientific meetings and conferences department who execute our science research conferences every year. Our marketing department has several full-time equivalents as well who help deal with marketing our journals, our conferences, communicating what FASEB is doing to our member societies, and keeping us very active on social media as well too. Right. I know we're running a little close on time, so I'll kind of speed through maybe the next couple slides. You'll see here, these are our primary sources of revenue. There are only 4. So as we discussed earlier, any excess revenue or margin earned is used to fund the public affairs, diversity work, and our DataWorks project as well too. And these are where we get our revenues from. Revenue impacts our overall budget, and you can see by the chart how each revenue source does impact our budget. Publications and SRCs have the disproportionate impact because they are the primary revenue generating departments. The board receives regular, at least quarterly updates on revenue generating programs throughout dashboards and formal reports at the regular board meetings. Board members should request any information that will assist them in carrying out their fiduciary responsibilities. This includes additional training or development. And now I'm going to quickly turn things over to Kevin with an assist from Marianne to describe some steps that FASEB is currently taking to safeguard our future financial stability.
And I'm just going to say that you can see I had a copy and paste error this morning and accidentally, so disregard where it says looking to the future. It was supposed to go on the next slide, and it did, but it also ended up here somehow.
Okay, so looking to the future, you want to go on, Sally? This is, I'm not sure what this slide is about, Sally. This is something you slipped in on me, didn't you?
Oh, Frank asked to put an to add this introductory slide in here. So basically, this we will give Frank credit for his thinking in that way, but just to introduce that this concept and what we'll be talking about in the next few minutes.
Okay. So that's the lead. Next slide. So I referenced what we had done. This was probably, I think maybe in 2021, 22, the scenario planning task force, where there was a group of society members, board members that just did a scan of what are some of the risks, challenges, opportunities going forward over the next several years. And I'll tell you honestly, many of them came to fruition. And that was things like challenges for societies in terms of membership, federal funding, costs and attendance at meetings, just the federal government budget, inflation, things like that. All of those have come together to impact societies and certainly FASEB as well. And so there's some examples there, but there are challenges like open science, trainees opting out of maybe basic biomedical research or in academics and going into other realms, the pipeline for trainees, fake news in terms of science, and the opinion of the public on scientists. I can just go down the list, but as I mentioned earlier, the societies are really being challenged. And we took this scenario planning task force and the findings were able then to translate those into realizing we needed to move forward and try to lead in this space. While societies have been a bit reticent, frankly, to stick their head out of the sand and realize, even though financially they know what's going on. So we're trying to lead in this area. And I think as board members, you're going to have that opportunity going forward. Mary Ann is chairing the new task force, which is what's integration task force, Mary Ann?
Yeah, I don't really know what it is other than it's integrative working group. So it charges to integrate the activities of the 4 working groups. One working group is on operations, another working group is on publications, another one's on meetings, and the last one is on professional and career development. So this task force will be overseeing the activities of those 4 working groups and trying to coalesce them into common goals, keeping a focus on where we're heading, and making recommendations to the board for their consideration and to the societies that are participating in those working groups down the road. So
on this slide, and Mary Ann, again, jump in, please. There was a lot of work done over the last 6 months through June to generate a final report. I suspect that will be something that if you've not seen, you can access as a board member. I think that'll be important for you to see that report. And that's the springboard now into the next phase of this. The idea here is to work with societies to try to identify areas of partnership. This is not FASEB leading, overseeing, and pulling people in, but it's FASEB being an equal partner, bringing to the table what we can contribute. A lot of that is things like publications and certainly the science policy efforts and public affairs that we have expertise in. So next slide, Sally, please. So the framework, we'll go over that real quickly. Next slide, in terms of trying to bring together these different entities. As I mentioned at the beginning, FASEB is made up of a variety of different societies in terms of budgetary, financials, size, areas of expertise, things like that. And what we envision is, next slide, Sally, is to somehow synergistically pull these together and have a framework that allows for collaboration, a structure that allows for synergies to build off of different strengths. And what I'll talk about next slide, please, is going to be how we would envision packaging this collaborative framework. And that's going to be in the areas of operations, publications, meetings, and professional developments. And we've talked about all of these to some extent, how FASEB does this. And what we're looking at in terms of this collaboration going forward is how we can leverage the strength in numbers, how we can optimize and be more efficient in providing operational services, whether that's investment management, it could be risk and compliance areas. There's different society sizes, how they fit in. Some societies are spending a lot to outsource the oversight of their operations. And are there ways we can collaborate, combine, use our existing resources? some of these, as I said, especially the small societies are really challenged right now. Publications, I already mentioned, open access is a challenge for some. How to leverage that to maintain publications and revenue generation perhaps, because a lot of societies have found historically over the last couple of decades, the cash cow is their publications. And that's being challenged right now. Meetings, we talked about experimental biology, the FASEB meeting prior to that. Societies have splintered off to some extent and want to do their own thing. Some are learning that it's working well. Some are realizing it's financially a challenge. And so how do we perhaps help with this optimization of meetings, co-located, shared systems and infrastructure, things like that. And then professional development. We feel like we've got some strengths there, especially with our leveraging of the large breadth of the societies, our impact and collaborations at the NIH, NSF level, for example, and how we can optimize the pipeline, the training, existing mid-career researchers as well, the whole span. So there's a whole framework that we're working on that we feel like we can work with societies, existing societies in FASEB. We'll certainly take on other societies outside the FASEB umbrella if we can, and they're interested. But you will be hearing a lot more about this over the next 6 months as we progress. Next slide, please. So you see the executive summary, the 4 models that are being explored with these work groups that are set aside now and populated by several of the societies. There's guiding principles that are going to be laid out that are steering all models. These work groups are going to define the outcomes and we'll come back. Some of the timeframes are going to be varying of implementation of certain aspects of this sooner rather than later. And as I mentioned earlier, FASEB's role, how we play in this right now, we are trying to get all these different entities together, but not own this solely. We will remain on our focus on what we do well, which is advocating for and advancing federal science funding and policies. That's the strength that we bring to the table. And that's what the societies want us to continue to do. That message has been loud and clear for us. You see the time frame there. Most relevant is going to be the working group activities. That middle arrow band there is where we are right now. Work groups are getting active and involved. And then reports will be out going to the board then. Hopefully we have some pilot societies joining over the next several months, and we will start down this road of this new iteration of a federation of some type. Marianne, you want to add anything at this point? I know that was quite rushed. All of you will hear much more about this, I guarantee you.
No, thanks. Did a great job. But I think I would just say, if any of you have any questions, please. You're going to hear about this again in the future, but if you have any specific questions that come to you even after this is over, you can pop Kevin and I, Sally, an email, and we'll be happy to answer or provide any guidance that we can, because it's a lot of information to take in.
And I would just say too, especially, I know this is a lot of information today, and there's a lot of areas that we're going to delve in more deeply in the next 2 sessions. And then for this collaboration model, that's going to be talked about extensively. I know this is like repeating things in future board meetings. And then also we are going to be having, now that the work groups have been formed, they're kicking off now, they're having their first meetings. We're going to have bi-monthly webinars to update board members and all of the working groups and the participating societies on what's happening in those. So there will be plenty of time to become very well versed in all of this. But yes, please do not hesitate to ask. And there are definitely no dumb questions, especially with this collaboration framework. Even some of us as staff members have had to be like, wait, can you clarify this for a bit? So there's a ton of moving parts, and it's very novel, and it's tricky.
Any questions as we wrap up? I apologize for going a little long here. appreciate you sticking around. No? Okay, well.
I'll ask one question. Jennifer, is it okay if people who are not in FASEB subscribe to these emails as well, or?
Absolutely. This is part of what we give away for free.
Okay,
It's
good, because I think
story.
our compliance people here might be interested in some.
Yeah, we would love to see more people sign up for our newsletter so we can spread the FASEB gospel. Is
Sure.
what we're doing. But yeah, anybody who you think would be, wants to keep abreast of it. We report on agency meetings. So like when the NIH advisory committee to the director meets, we always do a readout of our hot take on what happened with link outs to the videos and things like that too.
Perfect, thank you.
Any final words, Sally, as we wrap up? Good to go?
I don't think so. We will talk to you next Thursday about our fiduciary duties and our board norms. And I will be sending the recording and the slides with all the speaker notes in a few days. So you will have that to reference to.
Good, thank you. All right, thank you all.